If you like to drink cocktails that bring home the bacon with the boozy flavors of breakfast, then this week's episode is gonna have you going hog wild. Welcome to Cocktail Limelight. I'm your host, Erick Castro, and today we're gonna be making a cocktail that I'm absolutely smitten with. The reason why I love it so much is because it ties together culinary kitchen techniques with an austere and elegant final product. This is one of those cocktails where the end result, it's much bigger than the sum of its parts, because although there's not that many ingredients in it, the final product is absolutely delicious. The cocktail itself was invented by star bartender Don Lee in 2007 when he was working at the acclaimed bar Please Don't Tell in New York City. The cocktail combines maple along with bourbon and delicious Benton'S bacon. Now the way that we're gonna get the flavor of the bacon into this cocktail is by using a technique called fat washing, which Don Lee was a pioneer of back in 2007. And we're gonna learn how to do that by heating up a little bit of bacon and then fat washing it directly into the bourbon itself. And it has to be Benton'S bacon because the way that they cure and slow smoke their bacon gives it the unmistakable flavor that is damn near impossible to replicate with any of the conventional bacon that you would buy at your local grocery store. So if you want to make it as authentic as possible, I would recommend going with Benton'S bacon. And you know what? I'll actually leave a link in the episode description down below so you can order it yourself. And you know what? It's not an affiliate link. I don't get paid by them at all. Honestly, they just make damn good bacon. Though, if any bacon brands out there or other meat goods would like to sponsor me, you know what? Get at me, holler at me. Hit me up in the DMs. I love me some free meats. But before we get to the tutorial where we actually learn to fat wash this bacon fat into the bourbon, I want to let you know about the sacrifices I made for this episode. In order to get my hands on enough bacon fat that I would need for this bottle of bourbon, I ate bacon and egg sandwiches 6 days in a row this week. 6 days in a row. Now I know what you're thinking. It's probably not healthy for someone to eat that much bacon in 1 week. That to me is one of the sacrifices that I'm willing to make in order to teach you about cocktails. First off, I want to let you know that I did my absolute best to pack as many bacon jokes and pork puns into this episode as possible. So stay tuned because there's a lot more coming your way. Anyway, all this talk about cocktails is making me thirsty, and I could chew the fat with you all day, but instead, let's get down into it. Now to prepare this bacon fat-infused bourbon, first we're gonna need ourselves a hot plate or a stove and a pan to heat up that bacon fat. Then what we're gonna do is heat up this bacon fat on low for about 4 to 5 minutes to make it a little easier to go into solution with the bourbon. But just a heads up, be extremely careful doing this because I think it goes without saying that this rendered fat will be extremely hot, so be very careful pouring it or you could burn the out of your fingers. Our goal here isn't to burn the bacon fat, but rather to warm it up and liquefy it so that it goes into solution with the bourbon that much easier. God damn, that bacon fat smells so good. Now that we have the bacon fat all nice and warmed up, we're gonna pour 1.5 ounces of fluid ounces in it into a food safe container. In this case, a Cambro. Next, I'm gonna pour 750 mils of bourbon on top of this so it could pick up all that delicious bacony goodness. And since they use 4 Roses Yellow Label at PDT in this signature cocktail, I figured we'd do the same for a little added bit of authenticity. Apparently, when Don Lee was R&Ding the drink years ago, he tried many different whiskeys, including Tennessee whiskey, but ended up settling on 4 Roses Yellow Label as the high rye content gave a little bit of extra spice and backbone that the drink needed. Now that we have the bacon fat and the whiskey in there, I'm gonna go ahead and make sure I seal it tight and give it a good shake. The reason why I gave it that good agitation is to really make sure that all the fat molecules of the fat and the bourbon get nice and introduced to one another so they can start exchanging pleasantries and getting to know each other. Now that we have that part out of the way, let's just go ahead and set it aside at room temperature for 4 hours. Now that it's been 4 hours, I'm gonna go ahead and take all of this that's in here and put it in the freezer for 12 hours. During that 12 hours, the fat will congeal and turn into a really hardened puck, but of course, not before it leaves all its bacony flavor behind. And now that it's been 12 hours, it's time to separate the bacon fat from the bourbon. As I mentioned before, you can see that it's all congealed and turned into these like big fat chunks. And now we're gonna separate that with a funnel and a cheesecloth. The reason why we do this is because we've already extracted all the deliciousness out of the fat, and now we just want to make sure that we don't get any little funky particulates in our finished cocktail. And you know what? You'll be really glad that you did that, because look at all the little funky, chunky bits that we got out of there. And now that it's all done and I'm taking a chance to admire it, all I can tell you is that it smells freaking delicious. But you know what? Enough of me trying to hog the spotlight. Let's make a cocktail. Now, to make a world famous Benton's Old Fashioned, first we're gonna start out with 2 dashes of Angostura bitters, followed up with a 1/4 ounce of maple syrup. And right now we're using real, authentic grade B maple syrup. Whatever you do, don't be using any of this artificial pancake syrup stuff. That stuff for the most part is just food coloring and corn syrup, and it doesn't even deserve to share a glass with grade A American bourbon. So don't bring me any of that log cabin, Mrs. Butterworth, Aunt Jemima bullshit. Only real maple syrup here. And lastly, we're gonna add 2 ounces of the Benton's Bacon Fat Wash Bourbon that we just made. Now let's grab some ice and give it a good stir. Now we're gonna strain it over the rocks, or a large rock if you're fancy like that. And to complement the flavors of maple and bacon and bourbon, we're gonna garnish it with an orange twist. And there you have it, folks, the Benton's Old Fashioned. This is a drink that I probably had a million times while I was sitting at the bar top of PDT. And let me tell you, all these years later, it's every bit as good as it ever was. And you know what? I'm reminded once again as to why so many people refer to this as a modern classic, myself included. And with every sip, I'm reminded of the beautiful boozy breakfast of maple and bacon. And reminded one more time of the genius of Don Lee. And you know what? As delicious as it is here in my hand, I don't think it'll ever be as delicious as when I'm actually sitting at PDT, having some tots and a dog, and sipping on it there. But you know what? I save a little bit of money on the flight, and it's almost just as good. And there you have it, folks, a Benton's Old Fashioned, one of my favorite old fashioned variations. But what are some of your favorite old fashioned variations? Leave them in the comments below, and maybe it'll be featured in a future episode of Cocktail Limelight. And with that said, don't forget to muddle that like and subscribe button. And also, if you want to dive deeper into the world of craft cocktails, be sure to check out the Bartender Large podcast that I host on iTunes, Spotify, and anywhere else where quality podcasts are found. And with that said, thank y'all so much for tuning in, and we will see you again next week.